So to get started, you're going to chain any number of chains. We don't need to worry about stitch multiples with this particular pattern. Depending on the yarn you're using, the hook size you're using, the gauge you have, will depend on how many chains you're going to want to make for your foundation chain. I have a guide for you if you want to follow the free written pattern instructions. You can find a link below in the description to head on over to the blog for those details. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the number of chains for the scarf, which is 32 chains. So we're going to start by working a single crochet in the second chain from your hook. So counting over, that's my first one, this is my second chain, inserting my hook and working a single crochet into that chain, and then continuing working a single crochet in every chain across to the end. So for this number of chains, I'm going to end up with a total stitch count at the end of this row of 31 total stitches. So I'm getting to the end of my chain here. I'm going to work a single crochet in that last chain to complete my row and turn. And again, for this stitch count, I will have 31 total stitches. Row 2, I'm going to chain 1, and for the remainder of this pattern, we're going to be working in the back loops only. I'm also going to be working increases on one side and decreases on the other side of my scarf. That will eventually create my parallelogram shape. It will make it a lot easier for you. I highly recommend doing this, is putting a stitch marker on the side where you're working your increases. So on row 2, we're going to be working an increase on this side in this stitch. So I'm going to be working 2 single crochets in that first stitch at the base of my chain 1. So I'm going to look at the top here. So normally I would insert my hook under both loops, but I'm going to be only working in the back loop, which is the loop farthest from me, and I'm going to insert my hook under that back loop to make my first single crochet. And because this is my increase side, I'm going to place a stitch marker in that first stitch, and I'm going to continue moving that stitch marker up on this side of my scarf in that first stitch. So I'm going to work a second single crochet into that same stitch. So I have 2 single crochets all worked in that same stitch. Then I'm going to be working a single crochet in the back loop in every stitch to my last stitch. So working a single crochet in the back loop only of every stitch, and then when I get to the end of this row, I'm going to skip that last stitch. I'm not going to be working any stitches into that final stitch. So work a single crochet in the back loop only and work that across your row. So I've worked a single crochet in every stitch, working in the back loop only until I've come to the end of my row. I have 1 stitch remaining, and I'm going to leave it unworked. I'm not going to place a stitch into that stitch, and instead I'm going to turn for row 3. Your stitch count will be the same throughout the entire pattern. So even though I'm working an increase, I'm working 2 stitches at the beginning of this row, I'm not working in the last stitch, so I have the same number of stitches, 31. So for the next row, I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to work a single crochet in every stitch to the end of this row. So every stitch will get a single crochet worked in the back loop only again. That creates that ribbing. Single crochet all the way across, one stitch in every stitch. So I've worked a single crochet in the back loop only of each stitch. I'm going to turn for my next row, chain one, and here's my stitch marker. That's a nice reminder to me that this is the side that I'll be working my increases. So I'm going to be working 2 single crochets in the back loop only in that first stitch. And then I'm going to bring up my stitch marker into that first stitch of that row. And then go ahead and work a single crochet in the back loop only of every stitch until we get to the last stitch, which we're going to skip. So our pattern is really easy. It's a matter of increasing on one side, decreasing by skipping a stitch on the other, working repeating rows 2 and 3 to the size desired in your pattern. If you're making the infinity scarf, you're going to want to work enough rows for that to get to close to 60 inches long so that you can double loop it around your neck. However, you could go shorter if you were looking more for a cowl rather than an infinity scarf and you just wanted to wrap it once. You could go a little shorter than that. That's entirely up to you. For the hat instructions, in a week I will be releasing that pattern and I will have a link below in the description. So we get to the end of that row, I leave that last stitch unworked, I go ahead and turn, and I chain 1. Now I'm going to work in the back loop only again, single crochet in every stitch. And that's how easy it is. You're going to find that you have these little jagged edges on this one end, which I actually was a little concerned about when I first started designing this, but I ended up really enjoying this unique little look that I got. You could choose, if you find this undesirable, when you close your hat, you could keep this side to the top. So when you cinch your hat closed, you won't see those ends. I, however, chose to have these on the bottom end to give a little bit of extra visual interest to my hat. Obviously in the scarf, there's no real way to hide it. But again, I think it just added a little bit of extra visual interest to the scarf as well. So I really ended up liking this little edge that we got by skipping that stitch. So just continue working those repeat rows 2 and 3 to the size desired in your pattern. To get an accurate measurement, you'll want to measure either along the top or the bottom edge of your parallelogram. Do not measure through the middle because that will not give you an accurate measurement once those ends are folded together because of the parallelogram shape. So as you can see, I've worked several rows so that I could show you kind of how it's working up. Obviously, this isn't going to be big enough for my scarf, nor is it going to be large enough for a hat, but I just wanted to give you a general idea of the shape as we're working through this pattern. So when we're ready to sew the ends together to create either our scarf or the hat, this is where I ended off. I fastened off a long end. If you were making the hat, you'd want this end to be long enough to seam the ends together, as well as cinching the top of your hat closed. I would say a general good rule of thumb for that is about 3 times the length of the width here to give you enough yarn for both seaming and cinching. So we're going to fold our ends together. So this was the foundation, first row. This is my last row, and we're going to fold these together. It's going to seem a little odd at first because it's not a square or a rectangle, but we're still going to fold the ends together. So this end and this end are going to get folded together, and this end and this end are going to get folded together. And you can see it creates this really neat swirl, and those ends fold up together. This is the front. Little miniature hat here. So once we folded those ends together, we're ready to seam. So we're going to get our yarn on our tapestry needle here, and we're going to begin seaming these ends together. We have, you can see here, this was my first row, and so these are the loops that are left from that first row of single crochet, and then our final row of single crochet, we have those top 2 loops. So we're going to insert our needle into that loop that's left from our foundation chain, and we're going to be working basically a mattress stitch, mattress seam, in order to close this seam together. And we're going to come back, and with those top 2 loops here, I'm just going to grab the front loop, the one that's closest to me, working my needle underneath. And then just working back and forth. Grabbing that top loop. And doing that back and forth all the way across. This is going to then end up being my wrong side, because I'm going to have a ridge left on the other side, making this seam pretty invisible actually. You'll see here in a minute. I'll work under a few more of these, and then I'll turn it the other way so you can see what that looks like. So just working back and forth here. And then if I turn this the right side out, you can see that ends up being a pretty invisible seam actually. So once you've finished doing that, repeating that all the way through, so that the whole thing is seamed together, you're then going to cinch the top of your hat using, because our needle would then be here on this end, and we would go ahead and cinch our hat together. If this were the scarf that you were working on, you would just work through the end here, fasten off and weave that end in, and you have your scarf finished. So that's all there is to it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial today. Thanks so much for being with me. As always, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you never miss a new video. Thanks everyone. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.